Happy Pride, everybody! Hello, and thank you for joining me at this, the 5th story in a day, on a Sunday, with a story I haven't learnt before. Firstly, I wanted to apologise about last week's story, which didn't get to you till Thursday. That's due to some factors that I will tell you about in a second. But thank you to all those who have watched it, and especially well done if you guessed the riddles, because some of those were quite challenging. This week's theme is something which I think we've all experienced over this period. Some in varying different degrees, but also, and I only realised this morning, it also links very vaguely to the theme of pride, and that is sacrifice. So of course, we have all been sacrificing our time and our freedom for fighting the COVID-19 crisis. LGBTQ people had to sacrifice an awful lot over the period of persecution they've had, including the Stonewall riots, which is the anniversary that we celebrate today. And us in the Day family household have had to sacrifice our internet connection, because like last week I showed you a few clips of an Xbox with a bar loading on it. That bar never reached 100%. Even today we're just off 75%. So whilst it was Dad's birthday last Saturday, he still hasn't been able to play the game that he wanted to play. But we will do one day, and that is what sacrifice is all about. It's about giving something up in the knowledge that somewhere further down in the future, something better will come. So, a story about sacrifice. Now, one of the reasons I chose this theme is because a couple of weeks ago when I was doing my research, I found the origin of why bees sting people, or why bees have stingers. And I thought that might make an interesting story. But when I go off and do my research today, we may find a different link to the theme. Or just like last week, it could have absolutely nothing to do with the theme whatsoever, and I've forced it all together in the last 30 seconds. But this is the introduction over, and I'm gonna go and find you a sacrificial story to enjoy your Sunday with. Bye! I don't know if you can see it. I'll do that, it's easier. Look! We're at 75.2 after 8 days. 8 whole days of sitting here with the Xbox in the hall.
Just watching it.
75.2. I've had an initial search about sacrifice and folk stories about it, and of course I've been on the Society for Storytelling social media pages, and nothing is really jumping out at me. I found a couple of versions of the story about the bees, so I might tell that. That has potential. But then also I was thinking about Christian stories and Bible stories, which is something that I often tell a lot of. And the story of Job, or Jobby, involves various sacrifices that he does to prove his loyalty to God, or to challenge him. So I thought that might be another option. So I'm going down both avenues at the minute. Maybe something else will come out. Now, the word sacrifice has its origins and is sort of deeply rooted in religion. It comes from the Latin root word sacri, which means like sacred, and official, which means to perform something. So I thought it was only fair that I would do a story that comes from a religion, and the bee story comes from Roman religion. So I've got a little app here. It's quite hard to see, but the little green thing means it's raining. It says it's raining now. That's not good. But if you look outside, there isn't potentially rain. So I never know whether or not to go and do the story, or listen to technology and leave it.
I just don't know if it's a sacrifice that I'm willing to make.
So seeing as it's a Sunday, I just thought I'd have a few minutes sleep before I share with you a story. Night night. Oh. There we go. Time to tell you a sacrifice story. Off we pop. Oh. Who here has been stung by a bee? Put your hand up if you have been stung by a bee. And I'm pretty sure the majority of you now have your hands up, because it's a common occurrence. I mean, I've sat on many a bee. But do you know who it's worse for to be stung by a bee? Yeah, maybe people who are allergic to bee stings, but I'm predominantly talking about the bees themselves. Because as we know, once that stinger has gone into your flesh, that bee's life is over. It gives the ultimate sacrifice. And I thought I'd tell a story that explains the origins of this and why bees have a stinger that ultimately acts like a kamikaze pilot. Now, the science clearly states that the bee sting is only really intended for other insects as a form of protection. And if a bee was to attack another insect with its stinger, it would be fine. It would pull it down and continue on its life. And bigger mammals and humans, their skin is a little bit tougher for the poor little stinger, hence it gets stuck and disembowels the bee. But we're not interested in the science. We're interested in myths and folklore. And to tell this story, we have to go back to ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, they enjoyed many food and drink. They loved a party, they loved wine, they loved bread, wheat. But ultimately, the thing that was a real delicacy to them was the sweet, succulent taste of honey. It was a foodstuff that you could eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, on special occasions, on parties. You could have honey with anything. It was like the creme de la creme of spread. But honey was rare. And we know where honey comes from. It comes from those bees. The bees take the nectar from flowers, they bring it back to their nest, they put it in a big vat, I'm guessing. I've never been into a hive before. They mix up all the nectar and ultimately out, 24 hours later, comes honey. And the bees are very protective of their honey. Well, in ancient Rome, the bees could not protect themselves. Every day, as their new vat of honey was set out for the bees to sell on the market to anybody who wanted it, because as I said, it was very much in demand, various Roman characters, like gladiators or demigods, would pop along and help themselves to some of the honey. Ooh, very good. Very good, bees. Keep making this. Thus corrupting the vat of honey that had just been made and aggravating the bees. And whilst the bees would shout and curse, perhaps in Latin, they couldn't do anything about it. So when Spartacus would come along, ooh, I'm going to have me some of that honey, the bees buzz off, buzz, 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 buzz. But of course, Spartacus versus the bees, we know who's going to win. And the bees aren't happy about this. It actually gets to the level where the thievery is happening during the night as well, when the honey isn't quite ready yet. People were so desperate for it, like a drug, that they would be coming into the bees' hives, taking the honey when it's not at its best. So the bee government all came together and said to the queen bee, we need to do something about it. And the queen bee said, let's talk to the gods.
because at the end of the day, the gods always have the solution. And so there was a vote and discussion, and it came up to this one particular bee who was a messenger bee, who would sometimes go off to other nests and to go to share information. And it seemed that this bee would be the right one to tell the gods about their dilemma. And for bee pun purposes, this bee was called Phoebe. Now, Phoebe was relatively new to the messengering world. She'd been on a few little journeys to other hives and the like, but nothing like this. Nothing to go to the gods and ask them something so important. She spoke to her mum and dad, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Beyonce, and asked them for their help. They said, "Phoebe, look into your heart. You are meant to be a messenger bee. You are meant to spread information and tell others and help. And that's why you've been selected. You wouldn't have been asked if we didn't think you were ready. You know your grandfather, my dad, Sting, he was a messenger bee. And the hive still talk about him. If you want to be a remembered bee, a bee that goes down in history, be the bee you know you can be. Be." And Phoebe felt a weight had lifted from her shoulders. So she was given a little bit of honey to give to the gods, because of course they don't get to come down. I don't know the Roman equivalent. I'm going to call it Mount Olympus, but it might not be Mount Olympus, and I apologise if this is the case. I didn't quite get round to researching this bit. But we're going to call it Mount Olympus, the Roman equivalent of Mount Olympus. Phoebe went with her little vat of honey up high into the sky, higher than the trees, higher than the mountains, up to the clouds, where the gods lived in Mount Olympus. And there she spoke to the person at the gates and asked for Jupiter, who was of course in charge of all the other gods. And she was sent to Jupiter, and she flew there with her little wings flapping as fast as they could, and asked, "Jupiter, I have a gift for you. It's some freshly made honey, the best around. All of the mortals think so on Earth." Jupiter tried some. "Yes, that is good honey. Well, the problem is, Jupiter, us bees, we keep getting our honey stolen, and we don't have anything to defend ourselves. Perhaps if you could give us something that could kill, then they won't come and take our honey. Could you do that, Jupiter?" "Honey? Juno, come here. Juno, try this." This bee, Phoebe, would like to be gifted with a weapon to defend the bee kind from honey thieves. What do you think we should do? And Jupiter and Juno discussed as Phoebe sat there patiently. "Well, we've come to a decision. We like your product and we are happy to protect you. But, of course, what you're asking for is a bit extreme. So, we're going to give you a stinger. A needle in the back of your tail that will pierce the skin of any creature, human, mortal, god who is trying to steal your honey, and inject them with poison. But there is a catch. You'll only be able to use the stinger once." Phoebe thought this was a success. She flew off down from Mount Olympus to spread the good news to all the other bees. Jupiter has agreed. We will all get weapons. We will be given a stinger. I don't know when and I don't know what it will do, but supposedly it will inject thieves with poison that'll put them off stealing the honey. And all the bees cheered. They gave a big hooray to Phoebe. And Phoebe was loved by the bee kind. The next morning, Phoebe woke up and she felt something quite heavy in her back. She turned and looked. Of course, her back, which was quite smooth before, went into a straight point. This was the stinger that Jupiter spoke about. It was a bit harder to fly, but she flew, and all the other bees were there checking out their little stingers, proudly showing them off to each other. That evening, the emperor of the time, Julius Caesar, Augustus, we'll go with Caesar. Julius Caesar had heard about the honey that the bees had been making, and he strutted over to where the hive was. Ooh. This looks good honey. I'm sure the bees won't mind if I take a little bit. And as he stuck his finger into that hive and into the honey that wasn't quite ready yet, the bees came out in force. The fighter bees. Those bees that had been practicing with their sting the most, shot out of the hive. They flew around Julius Caesar's head, buzzing, buzz, 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 buzz. And Julius Caesar would try and bat them off with his hands. But still, they knew what they were doing. They came and they landed onto his arm and they pierced his arm with their newfound sting. Ow! Ah, what's this? I've never heard of bees to attack anyone before. Ow! Stop! Ah! But it was too late. 10 of those bees had stung Julius Caesar, and they all knew it was only a matter of time before the poison was going to work and kill. The damage was done and they were ready to fly off, but as they did so, they couldn't quite get lift off. They flapped their wings as fast as they could. And remember, these are the best bees around. These are the fighter bees. But they couldn't quite fly until eventually one was pushing so hard, his back ripped off. The stinger was still in Caesar's arm, and that little fighter bee fell down to the ground, dead. The other bees had seen what had happened, and in panic they flapped even harder, and one by one every single one of them became torn, their bodies completely ripping apart. Julius Caesar was in pain, but he wasn't dead. When Jupiter had said that the stings would kill, he meant that it would kill the bees. For he didn't like the bees, and he liked humans, and he didn't want them to be hurt. Phoebe got a tremendous backlash as reports came back of what had happened to those fighter bees. Everyone in the bee kingdom saw their stinger as a curse. They knew that ultimately they could defend their honey, but they'd have to give their life in the process. Now, a lot of the gifts that the gods had given, especially in Roman times, would disappear after a while, fade away. Phoebe and the other bees would desperately hoping that one day their stinger would perhaps either go away completely or be able to sting and not entirely kill the bee. But this wasn't the case. And even today, if you're going to help yourself to some honey in a hive, the bees come and they sting you, remember, they have given their life for that honey. They have made the ultimate sacrifice, the thing that you're getting from it. I mean, the history of sacrifice involves kids or animals being sacrificed keeps the gods happy. That is just ridiculous. So I ask you, next time you're thinking of sacrificing something, or asking for something extreme, think again. Because there's always a sting in the tale. James Little, thank you for listening to another story that I have researched, learnt, and told in one day.